Hello, my name is Jim McKenzie, and I work for the Mariposa County Resource Conservation District. This is part of a series of 4 videos describing oaks in Mariposa County and how to manage them. The first video in the series lists the oak species to be found in the county, describes some of the characteristics of each species, and discusses the many contributions oaks make to the forest ecosystem. The second video in the series deals with disturbances that affect oaks, drought, fire, and local changes in the oak's immediate surroundings. The video you're watching now is the third one in the series. It explains several important ways that have been used to maintain oaks in a healthy condition. It also emphasizes some additional maintenance practices that are necessary to minimize tree mortality in this new era where wildfire has become a serious problem in California. The fourth video gives procedures and methods that must be used if the viewer wishes to propagate oaks from acorns. As I said, this is the third video in the oak series. First, we describe the various pests, parasites, and diseases that can affect oaks. Next, we explain measures to be taken to maintain the trees, protection from high-intensity wildfire, combating structural problems in the trees, and maintaining a healthy area around the root base. This video is primarily concerned with maintaining the physical trees. What we say here is somewhat different from what you may have seen and heard from us a few years ago. Back then, conventional wisdom was that the oaks out in the landscape required little care and generally didn't like to be messed with. The use of pruning was to be minimized. Most of the attention was devoted to maintaining a healthy oak ecosystem as a whole. Tree health, plant and wildlife diversity, and habitat, and fire was to be kept away. Doing physical things to oaks was only considered appropriate in a few cases. Today, because of our wildfire crisis, a lot more emphasis is placed on achieving forest resiliency to wildfires through fuel reduction. This implies managing the oaks and everything that surrounds them. This is extra work, and performing it adds extra effort and cost. Our challenge is to find those extra resources and apply them. We begin by describing some oak parasites, diseases, and pests. We cover some, but not all of these. Thick books have been written on this subject. We are only presenting a few common ones you're likely to find in Mariposa County. This image shows a set of colorful oak tree ornaments called galls. The image was taken from a single photograph. Galls happen when a tiny female gall wasp lays her eggs on an oak twig or leaf. The tree creates the gall, which encapsulates the eggs. Gall wasps generally fall victim to other insects, animals, or fungi, so they require no management. The galls themselves are parasites, but they do no real harm to the tree. As you can see from the image, galls come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and colors. They are included here to let you know what they are and to inform you that you don't need to worry too much about them. Here are 3 more examples of oak tree galls. The right-hand image captures a cluster of oak apples or oak balls, another form of gall. They are generally 1 to 2 inches in diameter. The upper left-hand image shows a handful of small round galls picked up off the ground under an oak. Both wetwood and alcoholic flux are infections and are caused by the entry of bacteria into wounds in the tree bark. The infections are caused by several different bacteria, all of which are common in both soil and water. Branch dieback may occur in a few cases, but the infections seldom cause serious harm to the tree. The western oak bark beetle has historically been found in coastal areas, but infestations have recently been observed in El Dorado County in the Sierra foothills. We therefore assume that this pest will be found in Mariposa County sooner or later. This beetle bores into a drought-stressed or dying tree and infects it with a fungus. This causes foam to exude from the entry hole. An infected tree is then said to possess foamy bark canker disease. The appearance is shown in the image on the right, courtesy of the El Dorado County Department of Agriculture. There is no known method for controlling this disease, and an infected tree may die. The infestation has usually occurred in trees already stressed by other problems. If an infected tree is important to you, consult an arborist. The carpenter worm is the larval stage of the carpenter moth. The female moth lays eggs on the bark. The eggs hatch, and the larva bores into the bark of the oak. An indication of an infestation is a dark spot on the tree trunk. Entrances are often found in tree crotches or in bark crevices. Frass, or sawdust, will appear at the entrance as the worm continues to eat its way in. If left unchecked, the worm can girdle the tree, killing it. Consultation with an arborist is recommended. There are methods available to kill the worms in the tree, but they are best applied by a professional. The Mediterranean oak borer was introduced to California from abroad. A limited number of infestations have been found in Napa County in blue oaks and valley oaks. This insect tunnels through the bark into the xylem, which carries water and nutrients up into the tree from the roots. If left unchecked, the borer will kill the tree. Signs and symptoms of an infestation are dead branches, boring dust and cracks in the bark, and oozing sap visible on the bark. Methods of control are still under study. If you suspect an infestation, report it by phone to the pest hotline at 1-800-491-1899. Meanwhile, avoid bringing firewood onto your property from elsewhere, as doing so could bring the borer to you. Now we have come to a place in this video where we might discuss pruning. Pruning, done properly, has the potential to lengthen a tree's healthy life. It also has the potential to harm a tree permanently. Here are some best practices for pruning which, if followed, will minimize future problems with the tree. If limbing, use the proper limbing technique. This technique is described on the next panel. Take out no more than 25% of the foliage in a season, and no more than 10% on old, large trees. When working on live limbs, prune in the proper season, winter for deciduous oaks, and late summer for evergreen oaks. Keep your tools sharp. If infection is a potential problem, disinfect your tools before each tree. Two of the infections, wetwood and alcoholic flux, were described in a previous panel. If in doubt about infections, disinfect. You should also consult an arborist. Use a household cleaner to disinfect your tools, such as Lysol or Pine Sol. Do not use bleach. If infection is a potential problem, don't use a chainsaw, as they are impossible to disinfect. Don't ever apply disinfectant directly to any part of a tree. The pruning tools are what you would expect: pole saw, loppers, hand pruning saw, and a small chainsaw. The chainsaw is optional. This panel describes the proper way to cut limbs from an oak tree, or most any tree for that matter. The procedure involves 4 cuts, with the most important cut being the 4th and final one, which is just far enough out from the trunk to avoid the branch collar. The branch collar is seen as a flaring of the branch just before the trunk. Keeping the collar intact will help assure that the wound will heal perfectly. Here are the 4 cuts. First, an undercut, about a foot or so out from the trunk. The second cut should be an overcut all the way through, about 4 inches beyond cut number 1. The third is an undercut just beyond the branch collar, and the fourth is an overcut just outside the branch collar and all the way through. This image shows a blue oak tree with heavy growths of mistletoe. Mistletoe is a plant that grows on branches of various trees, including oaks. Mistletoe produces seeds which are eaten by birds. The seeds, if scattered about in the tree, can cause spreading of the infestation. Mistletoe absorbs both water and nutrients from the tree. Healthy trees can tolerate minor infestations, but the infestations will tend to grow larger in both size and number in healthy trees. Heavy infestations can reduce tree vigor and can damage a tree if left in place long enough. But developing a heavy infestation takes decades. If infested trees are out in the landscape, you should seriously consider leaving the mistletoe in place. The contributions made by the mistletoe seeds and leaves to the food chain for birds and other creatures is important to both wildlife diversity and overall environmental health. Furthermore, complete eradication of mistletoe is both difficult and expensive, and there are higher priorities for spending money to maintain a stand of oaks, reducing the occurrence of wildfire being one of them. If the infected tree is part of a residential viewscape, then controlling the mistletoe may be called for. For proper control techniques, consult Pest Note 7437, University of California Integrated Pest Management. Let's review this panel to summarize what we have said. Healthy trees can tolerate some mistletoe infestation, but mistletoe will reduce tree vigor over time. Trees close to residential areas may have high value as part of the viewscape, and as such, a more aggressive approach to mistletoe management might be appropriate. Out in the landscape, you should leave mistletoe in place given its contributions to the environment. The website for detailed instruction regarding mistletoe management is ipm.ucanr.edu/pmg/pestnotes/PN7437. This panel begins the discussion of oak maintenance. Our approach to this subject is different from what an arborist would do to assure a beautiful, well-shaped tree. Instead, our goal is to create a landscape that bounces back after a wildfire has occurred. However, we'll use the term resilience instead of bouncing back. Resilience means minimal tree mortality or harm caused by a wildfire. Here we describe one of our primary maintenance goals: to significantly reduce occurrence of high-intensity fires near oak trees. We will do this by removing ground and ladder fuels under and around each oak and pruning out oak limbs that are too close to the ground. We will also perform enough tree thinning to assure an open canopy and the growth of grass. We will also describe several potential structural weaknesses that can occur in oaks and what to do about them. Some of these can be dangerous, even lethal, to humans. What do we really mean by the term high-intensity fire? To be sure, there are lots of definitions floating around, but for the purposes of these videos, we define a high-intensity fire as one whose proximity and temperature, both internal and radiated, is sufficient to kill an oak tree. Here we have two images. The top image shows a stand of oaks surrounded by brush and other fuels in sufficient quantity and proximity to cause oak tree death should a wildfire pass through. One must assume that such a fire will occur sooner or later. Accordingly, we label this piece of ground the future site of a high-intensity fire. The bottom image shows a stand of blue oaks without ladder fuel. The only fuel besides the trees themselves is ground fuel, grass, and a few small shrubs. A wildfire could pass through this piece of ground without killing a single tree. In fact, the fire will improve oak tree health. We would call such a fire a low-intensity fire. To review, the top image depicts the future site of a high-intensity fire, whereas the bottom image represents the future site of a low-intensity fire. What makes the contrast between these two images all the more interesting is that these two plots of land are right next to each other. Less than 50 feet separates the two images. We surmised that the two plots were owned by different people. The exact location of the property line was obvious. Sure enough, our GPS device showed a parcel boundary exactly where we expected to see one. Look at this image. The situation you see here can only be described as, frankly, a mess. Believe it or not, there are 6+ oak trees in the picture, but they are mostly obscured from view by ground and ladder fuels. To help you out, we've marked the oak tree trunks with red dots. The process for fixing this is simple. Here are the basic steps. Cut off small trees and shrubs growing inside the root protection zone at the ground level. Remove any dead branches that are lying on the ground. Prune off dead limbs and limbs that are too close to the ground, less than 6 to 10 feet depending on the tree's size. Leave the leaf mulch in place on the ground. Thin out other small trees and shrubs in the area and clear around those to be kept. Open the canopy by thinning the stand to encourage sunlight and growth of grasses. Here is what a similar area looks like after being treated using all of the steps shown in our list. The stand of oaks in this image looks nice, but more importantly, the oaks will tolerate a low-intensity fire with little or no tree mortality, regardless of the oak species. On the contrary, the fire will improve the overall health of the trees in the stand. One further possibility for more openness would have been removal of the small tree cluster shown by the orange arrow. It is also the far end of the spectrum from the previous image, which had an abundance of ladder and ground fuel around a small stand of oaks. As you can see, there is no ladder or ground fuel here, and the trees are limbed up. Also, the canopy above is open. Since there will be little tree mortality, we label this piece of forest as resilient if struck by a wildfire. At the same time, we cannot label it diverse with respect to either wildlife or plant life. There is no diversity of plants which provide food or habitat for wildlife. A forest needs both plant and wildlife diversity to be a healthy forest. It would be possible to leave or even install some oak-associated plants, such as redbud, toyon, or manzanita, outside the root protection zone of the oaks and still retain the characteristics of a low-intensity fire area. This would improve the diversity of the immediate area without increasing risk of hosting a high-intensity fire. Of course, care must be taken to not add too much for the space. Furthermore, there is no reason not to limb up nearby oak-associated plants and remove dead branches to lessen or eliminate their contribution to fire intensity. Finally, consider leaving an upright snag or hollow log for wildlife habitat, but leave it in a location where it won't contribute much to fire intensity. To summarize, the landowner should consider the trade-off between resilience and diversity in managing his or her parcel. Some areas must be set aside that are not as clear and clean as the one shown in the previous panel. We recommend that you view another video in this series to explore this trade-off further. Its title is An Introduction to Achieving Forest Resiliency and Diversity. Assuming that you have altered a stand of oaks properly, as we have outlined, you must understand that if left alone for a few years, you will be headed back to a stand that is no longer resilient because of the growth of new shrubs and plants around and under the trees. Therefore, you must maintain the stand to keep it returning to a resilient state. One alternative for doing that is the use of a prescribed burn to remove the new growth without harming the trees. The next panel will show you how to access instruction on the use of prescribed burns. You must take advantage of this instruction before attempting a burn. The steps are simple. Access the instructional videos on prescribed burning. Plan the burn as outlined in the instructions. Understand that you must repeat the burn every 6 to 12 years. Document the plan so that the next time you or another family member or a different landowner faces the need for a burn, they can be guided by the plan you developed. The University of California Cooperative Extension, or UCCE, is a division of the UC Agricultural and Natural Resources, or UCANR, service. The UCC ANR staff have videotaped 5 1.5-hour instructional presentations on prescribed burning. These are listed below. Session 1 is on fire ecology. Session 2 covers permitting. Session 3 is about prescribed fire planning. Session 4 is on resources for burning, and Session 5 covers the benefits of cultural burns and offers a PBA next steps discussion. You are encouraged to view these prior to attempting a burn yourself. Failure to do so could result in an escaped fire that could destroy both property and people. You may also be cited for failure to obtain permits or to properly prepare a burn area. Let's move on to consider a few common structural weaknesses in oak trees. We will emphasize problems that could cause human injury if not dealt with. In some cases, the changes we advocate will improve fire resilience as well. The first is the removal of dead, dying, or decayed branches. These are easy to detect when the tree is leafed out. Pruning is best done when oaks are dormant. Evergreen oaks are dormant in July or August, while deciduous oaks are dormant in winter. Branches to be removed should be marked when the tree is leafed out if the tree is deciduous. Note the red marks on the image, showing the dead limbs to be removed. It is also possible to leave dead branches in place to provide perches and nesting sites for birds. The downside to leaving dead branches in place is their dead weight and the possibility of breakoff, creating ground fuel or human injury. Breakoffs may also create a tree wound that will introduce rot over time. Now we will describe a structural weakness that can endanger a residence. The image here shows a fork in a tree, and forks are very common things to see in oaks. The professionals have a term for forks. They call them codominant branch attachments because the branches are more or less of equal size, and more importantly, there is no common wood linking the two branches together. This is a much weaker link than when a smaller branch is linked to the side of a larger branch or trunk. In that case, there is a knot in the larger branch or trunk, making the link much stronger than in the codominant case. Now we will describe an additional structural weakness that can endanger a residence even further. What if the codominant branch attachment somehow included bark in between the two branches? In that case, the connection between the branches is even weaker than what we described in the previous panel. And if there is a lot of lean in one of the branches and a house is in the way, we may have an expensive and perhaps fatal accident if that codominant branch separates and falls. These two images show such an occurrence, but without the house in the way. One leaning branch of a codominant attachment, with bark in between, hit the ground in the winter of 2019-2020. The red circle in the left image shows the bark on the lower part of the still upright half. The bark was there. The right image shows the end view of the fallen branch, which was almost 4 feet in diameter and over 70 feet long. Note that the cut end view of the fallen branch shows another codominant pair further up. It should be noted that codominant branches without included bark are also dangerous, but less so. Large trees with codominant branches should be removed if endangering a house. Such trees may be left alone if out in the landscape. This beautiful old tree has a common weakness, and it exists in at least 3 places. The problem occurs when a side branch grows in length and size and stands out horizontally from the trunk. The tendency to break off due to weight is much increased by the length, by weight of wood and foliage, and by the fact that the branch is not angled upward. We advocate some cutting on this tree. On the lower left of the trunk, we would like to see the branch taken off by cutting almost next to the trunk. With the other cases, we see that cutting should be done further out on the branches to decrease the weight. Why not just let them fall? Because breakoffs often wound the main stem of the tree in such a way that it never heals properly, and this can give rise to internal rot. Also, falling branches can injure humans if they fall without warning. Another variable is the age of the tree. Old trees don't heal quickly. In this example, a case could be made to cut the branch on the lower left further out rather than at the trunk. This would decrease the size of the wound. Most oaks have a characteristic flare at ground level. This flare is called the root crown. The crown and surrounding area are sensitive places. The landowner must avoid the following near the root crown: the compacting of soil, the applying of moisture during dry parts of the year, and the addition of fill or loose dirt which raises the grade level around the root crown. Failure to avoid these situations can lead to crown rot or oak root fungus. Crown rot is characterized by a loss of tree vigor, twig dieback and wilting, and bark wounds that ooze. Symptoms of oak root fungus include the dieback of branches and the growth of mushroom-like fungi around the stem. Internal rot is another common problem one sees in oaks, particularly old ones which have not seen much care. Internal rot can occur in the trunk or in the branches. It can be caused by exposed wood from branch breakoff or from improper pruning. Unchecked internal rot can result in loss of the tree. You should, however, leave cavities that are created by rot in place to serve as nesting locations. The image on the left shows a wound occurring from branch removal that is healed perfectly. Proper limbing technique was used. Note, however, that the healing process took over 20 years. The center image shows a similar wound, but one that is not healing properly. This wound and the rot will eventually progress into the center of the tree. This process will also take years. The right image shows a dead tree with multiple unhealed branch wounds. The tree is probably completely hollow. The center and right images are upright and off the ground and present little fire danger. As such, they should be left in place as wildlife nesting locations.